In the narrow corridor of the Strait of Hormuz, where one-fifth of the world's petroleum transits, a silent war has turned loud. A single miscalculation, a naval drone as warships scramble, missile batteries on the coast of Hormuz lock onto targets. The modern battlefield is near instantaneous, leaving no time for reflection or second-guessing. Ship commanders make choices in seconds that will echo for decades. In the high-stakes chess match of the Persian Gulf, the first naval engagement is not a skirmish, it is the opening salvo of a long, dark campaign.
Protect the region's security and repel any attack that might come from the west in the future.
Our message to all nations, especially our neighbors in Persian Gulf, is our maneuvers for securing the Persian Gulf against any threat of any nation, especially superpowers. We are ready for securing the peace in the Persian Gulf.
With help from Allah, even at sea, and with cooperation.
Within hours, skies over the Gulf are filled with the roar of military aircraft. Launch decks hum with tension as interceptors fly sorties into contested airspace. Coastal defensive networks fire countermeasures against incoming cruise missiles, their exhausts drawing white streaks against the morning sky. As naval vessels burn, the realization sinks in. The blockade has begun, and the shipping lanes are closed.
His threat to potentially militarily attack Iran over its killing of peaceful demonstrators, as well as the threat of mass executions against those it now holds. Iran, for its part, has been just gripped by tension over those nationwide protests and the bloody crackdown launched afterwards. Activists now say over 6,100 people were killed and 40,000 others detained in those demonstrations. Iran is insisting that it's willing to potentially strike at will against the United States even before any American attack. And meanwhile,
this escalation was not built in a day. It is the tragic culmination of decades of diplomatic decay. The collapse of hard-fought nuclear agreements, the steady tightening of economic sanctions, and the persistent war of words in international chambers laid the foundation. When diplomacy is treated as a zero-sum game, the margins of peace grow dangerously thin.
And sort of the meaning behind it actually shows sort of the stretch of how things have gone for Iran lately when it comes to the nuclear deal, when it comes to its relations with Europe and the wider world, as well as its relations with the United States. Now, the 2015 nuclear deal actually grew out of negotiations that Iran had secretly at first with officials from Barack Obama's administration in Oman, and then later openly that it had with the US and other world leaders. That culminated in the 2015 nuclear deal with world powers, which broadly saw Iran agree to limit its enrichment of uranium in exchange for the lifting of really crushing economic sanctions.
In Washington and Tehran, policy rooms hum with emergency meetings. Diplomatic efforts, once designed to establish lines of communication, are replaced by televised warnings and unilateral declarations. Economic sanctions, meant to pressure governments, instead compress the lives of ordinary citizens, raising resentment and fueling the ideological drive toward conflict. The bridges of compromise have been burned.
Not damage Russian cooperation with Iran. One senior Iranian official told Reuters on Saturday that Russia's move was, quote, not constructive for talks between Tehran and global powers. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said limitations due to new sanctions had become a stumbling block for the Iran nuclear deal, warning the West that Russian national interests would have to be taken into account. Two diplomats, one of them not directly involved in the talks, said China has also demanded written guarantees that its companies doing business in Iran wouldn't be affected by U.S. sanctions.
The United Nations Security Council gathers under emergency conditions, but the vetoes of global powers block any resolution. The international treaties and institutions built after the great wars of the 20th century stand paralyzed. International law becomes a secondary consideration as military doctrines take over, and the language of compromise is replaced by the grammar of force.
It has sought to eradicate the state of Israel. It has waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder. It is responsible for a series of unprovoked armed attacks targeting the United States and Israel, violations of the UN Charter, and threats to international peace and security across the Middle East. it has even attempted to assassinate the U.S. president, President Trump. It has done so not only directly, but through its proxies, seeking to hide and
As the shooting starts, the lines of global alliance harden. Washington mobilizes its carrier strike groups, drawing in naval support from regional allies and NATO partners. Flight decks operate around the clock, deploying fighter wings to establish dominance. The logistical machine of global superpower warfare gears up, funneling fuel, ammunition, and personnel toward the Persian Gulf.
The Ford is the world's biggest aircraft carrier, and it will move alongside the USS Abraham Lincoln, which has been in the region for some time now. Trump has threatened to use force against Iran should it not reach a deal with him over its nuclear program. He's also warned Iran that he's willing to use force if it kills peaceful protesters or conducts mass executions of those detained, since Iran heavily cracked down on those nationwide protests last month. This all comes as these talks between the United States and Iran seem for the moment to be at a stall. There had been some thought from Trump especially that there would be more.
Iran responds by activating its regional networks. From the Levant to the Gulf of Aden, proxy forces and regional militias mobilize, launching rocket attacks and drone strikes to stretch coalition resources. This is asymmetric warfare on a continental scale, where small, decentralized groups challenge high-tech military networks, turning the entire region into a fluid, multi-front combat zone.
That's right, Foley. More details from U.S. Central Command that described it as a complex attack. This barrage of objectiles and drones were launched from Yemen toward international shipping lanes as dozens of merchant ships were traversing through the southern Red Sea. U.S. and U.K. fighter jets responded, according to the Pentagon, and they worked in tandem, shooting down 18 drones, 2 cruise missiles, and 1 ballistic missile. There was no reported damage or injuries as a result of these.
Across the Middle East, troop movements redraw borders. Convoys of armored vehicles kick up dust in the deserts of Iraq and Syria, while missile defense installations scan the horizons. Naval formations assemble in the Arabian Sea, preparing for long-range blockades. The conflict has outgrown its initial borders, evolving into a regional war with global participants. But the true weight of war does not fall on commanders or fleets, it falls on the soil. In the cities and towns of Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, the air is thick with the dust of collapsed masonry and the smoke of artillery strikes. Ground battles turn urban centers into contested ruins, where every street corner is a trench and every building is a target.
غربطوا فيه اسمه الجمع قصد الحرامي
في عليك
هيك عشان
For civilians trapped in the combat zones, survival is a daily battle. Emergency services stand overwhelmed, hospital wards overflow with the wounded, and clean water and food become rare commodities. Families pack what they can carry into buses and cars, fleeing toward overcrowded camps, their lives reduced to a suitcase. The human cost is written in empty streets and makeshift clinics. As military strikes hit supply hubs and logistics networks, the civilian infrastructure collapses. Power grids go dark, water treatment facilities stop pumping, and communication lines are severed. In the shadow of high-tech drone operations and precision bombing campaigns, millions of ordinary people face a primitive struggle for basic survival, their homes turned into front lines.
Substances. We have examined the whole area with detectors. We have collected the remains of explosives, and now they are being moved to be disarmed somewhere else.
It was the loudest blast people in the area had heard since the Saudi-led campaign began. Look around and you get a sense of hundreds of lost man-hours, jobs on hold, and the thousands of dollars that will be needed for reconstruction. Although none of this is as urgent as caring for the hundreds of people hurt in that one bombing. The city's largest hospital is a 20-minute drive.
The shockwaves of the conflict ripple far beyond the borders of the Middle East. With the Strait of Hormuz blocked, global oil markets experience unprecedented shocks. Crude prices spike to record levels, causing panic on international stock exchanges. Trading screens flash red as supply chain disruptions threaten manufacturing, transport, and energy systems worldwide.
$80 to $90 a barrel this week. Israel launched a new wave of strikes on Tehran on Sunday, and Iran responded with more missile barrages. The attacks put ships at risk, with missiles hitting at least 3 tankers off the Gulf Coast and killing 1 seafarer. That was according to shipping sources and officials on Sunday. Iran says it has closed navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, a key route for oil supplies. The news prompted checks on stockpiles by refiners and governments in Asia. That region gets most of its crude from the Gulf, which accounts for half of China's supply and 90% of Japan's. Risks to commercial shipping have surged.
Nowhere is the vulnerability more visible than in India. Importing over 80% of its crude oil, the Indian economy faces immediate headwinds. Spiking fuel prices drive up inflation, raising the cost of basic food and transport for hundreds of millions. In the busy shipping ports of Mumbai and Gujarat, cargo vessels sit idle as insurance rates soar and shipping lanes remain high-risk zones.
The current increase in oil, it is my practice. I follow this cooling system with my colleagues, so it hardly impacts me. And I'm into hybrid model, so it's work from home plus office.
आम लोगों के लिए तो एक-एक रुपये की भी बहुत बड़ी वैल्यू है सर। कैसे-कैसे आदमी सुबह से शाम तक मेहनत करता है, फिर कैसे-कैसे वो करता है, और गवर्नमेंट ये चीज़ देख नहीं रही है।
Because of the crude oil, it's impacting everybody. But I'm following the pooling system.
Diplomatically, New Delhi faces a difficult balancing act, urging restraint while protecting its energy security and millions of citizens working in the Gulf. As the conflict drags on, the global economy slows down, reminding us how tightly bound we are to a single shipping lane. In the ashes of this regional war, the entire global order burns.
The war in Ukraine has magnified the slowdown in the global economy, which could soon be facing the painful combination of feeble growth and rising prices known as stagflation, last seen in the 1970s. The World Bank said global growth could fall to 2.1% in 2022 and 1.5% in 2023, driving per capita growth close to zero if downside risks materialized.
And when you have growth rate at the global level around 1.5%, that means you are in a very serious, severe downturn.
Ian Coase, director of World Bank's Prospects